It's Friday, September 6th, 2024, and Fridays are Ask or Tell Me Anything, next on the AM Update. Thank you for joining me again each morning here on the AM Update for another week. We'll be back tomorrow for No Suck Saturday. It's going to be an Ask Izzy edition. We have one question, actually, that we're going to tackle, and we'll have a guest along with us for the first time as well. That episode's going to be available for the public, so you don't have to be a $5 a month subscriber to the AM Update to listen to that. Check your podcast platform of choice. Tomorrow morning should be there around 6 a.m. Central Time. Thank you for all of your wonderful submissions this week for Ask or Tell Me Anything. We'll start with this from Bob Kral. Since finding you and the guys at your day job, I've been leaning more on my faith. I'm curious what your thoughts are on cursing. I find a well-placed curse word is necessary at times. What do you think? I think that there are hypocrites on this issue, and there are people who do a really good job. And I think I probably fall into the former category. Unfortunately, I'm trying to do better. But in terms of a well-placed curse word, well, what are curse words? I think it's kind of subjective. I really do think it is kind of subjective. Like my pastor, I like what he does, where you would hear the word, the SH word, he would say, well, it scares the spit out of you. Well, you're obviously substituting for another word that is more offensive. It's very subjective. So my thinking on this is that you try to abstain as much as possible. Complete abstinence is the goal. Is that always possible? No, but the other extreme is just conjunction, junction, what's your function, where you're cursing, or you're saying a bad word every other word. The Carlin's 7 deadly words, I think it is, or 5 deadly words, whatever it is. That's a pretty good indication of what are the really bad words you're not supposed to say in public, but it is pretty subjective. My take on it is try to abstain as much as possible. Try to use other rhetorical devices to make your point as much as possible. But I hear you. Sometimes it's just impossible to communicate what you're trying to communicate with the urgency that you're trying to communicate without using a curse word. But my thing is try to abstain. I think abstinence is the golden standard. There are people who are great at that. There are people who are not great at that, who say they need to be great at it. I'm one of those. I'm a hypocrite trying to get better. Kevin Dilk said, Pastor Greg Locke of Tennessee, his house was shot up yesterday by 30-plus high-caliber rounds. Yeah, if you were listening to the AM Update, you would have heard that I covered that story, actually, yesterday. Big DC G-Men says Supreme Court allows Biden administration to withhold family planning funds to Oklahoma over abortion dispute. This story is from NBC News. It reads, the Supreme Court on Tuesday allowed the Biden administration to refuse to disperse federal family planning funds to Oklahoma in an abortion-related dispute. The administration has sought to withhold the funds because Oklahoma refused to provide patients with a hotline number that could provide neutral information about baby killing. The brief court order rejecting an emergency application filed by the state noted that 3 of 6 conservative justices, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch, disagreed with the outcome. The court did not explain the reasoning behind this decision. Thank you, big DCG man, for bringing that story to my attention. Uncomfortably Dumb says, your thoughts on the Julie Kelly closet Democrat news? She was very anti-DeSantis during the primary. I find the latest news on her to be interesting considering her staunch pro-Trump stance. I verified all of everything except for her home address. I verified all of that independently myself. And unless there's another Julie Kelly spelled exactly the same way that lives in Orland Park, Illinois, yeah, it's pretty cut and dried what this is here. And I'll leave you to your discernment what to do with that information. Follow Truth says, we know Election Day is upon us, that the Democrats are blaming the Russians on election influence. What a mess we are. Why do we always blame the Russians? Never China? The Russians, I don't know. I don't, that's actually a good question, but I think it's pretty cut and dried in my mind. Back in February, I think it was, of 2021 or maybe 2022, whenever the Russian invasion of Ukraine finally got underway. Why is there never any blaming of China? Why is it always blaming Russia? I think it's because Russia still sees itself, or at the very least, Vladimir Putin sees Russia as having some sort of national destiny. There is still a sense of nationalism within Russia. And so that's why the World Economic Forum types always eschew Russia and embrace China. China is what they have designed for the rest of the world. They are the model. Russia is the fly in the ointment of their globalist hegemony plans. So that's why I think they always blame Russia. But it is a good question nonetheless. OG Thor says, when you and Bella had your second child, how did you handle and watch and care of your oldest? Our second is due next month, and we also have a 2-year-old. Same situation that we were basically in, seeking ideas for a game plan during the hospital stay for care of the older sibling. So I'm just going to tell you what we did. I'm not saying that this is the way to go, but this tended to work out, I think, for us. I had 2 weeks off from work. That was very nice. There are some people who don't get any time off, some people who get 3-4 months off. So enjoy that time as much as you possibly can. Yeah, the first few weeks are going to be really hard, but enjoy that time as much as you can. So when we were at the hospital, we actually sent Ben to stay with Bella, her parents. And so he was actually with them for a few days. I think he even stayed an extra day even after we had gotten back home. And he never came and visited in the hospital. Bella, she'll tell you this, having worked labor and delivery, it's really tough, especially with toddlers. They're away from mommy and daddy for a few days, and then they only get to visit for maybe an hour. That's really, really tough on them. So we made this decision that when we see Ben for the first time, it's for him coming back home. In the ensuing, I would say probably 6 weeks, we are really, really fortunate to be close to both sets of grandparents, and we leaned a lot on both sets of grandparents. They would come and either watch Ben at our home or take them to their home, or I would drop Ben off at my in-laws' place on the way to work when I started going back to work. So we leaned a lot on the in-laws, on the grandparents. And it wasn't every single day, especially when I was still home, but almost every single day, at least to give Bella just a little bit of backup, because the first 4 weeks especially, you are in the trenches of kind of hoping that new baby sleeps. And it's really, really tough to do it with 2 kids. So when I am home, though, when I'm home from work, and when I'm at home for, an extra day off, an extended weekend, typically our plan, we do spend time together as a whole family. But typically, because Bella now has both kids full time, we kind of do a divide and conquer strategy. I'll take Ben for quite a bit of the time, even if I'm doing this podcast. Sometimes you'll hear him milling around in the back if I'm trying to do early prep and early recording on stuff before the final cut. Later in the evening, you'll hear Ben milling about. I've got him downstairs with me just to give a little bit less pressure to Bella as she deals with most of the kids. So again, if you can, lean on your family as much as you possibly can. Really fortunate that 2 sets of grandparents that want to be involved with their grandchildren. That's really fortunate. If you're close with your church family, don't be afraid to ask for help with your small group as well. Don't be afraid to ask for help. There have been times when, our small group is great at church. There have been times where we've needed help, if nothing else than prayer or food. There's been times where they've reached out to help from the rest of the small group, and it's really a blessing. So those are actually good opportunities to lean into your local church family. Let's see. That's a good question, OG Thor. Thank you. And on 1234 says, what do you make of the World War II discourse surrounding Tucker's interview with Daryl Cooper? What is your takeaway from it? I think history is a lot more complicated than we make it out to be. I think that you should be able to ask questions about the history that you've been taught. I think if you come to the conclusion about World War II history that leads you to say anything resembling the lines of, well, actually Hitler, or on second thought Hitler, you've been doing some eisegesis. You've been reading your own agenda into history. Hitler is a bad guy. He was a very, very bad guy. And I'm just not going to entertain any notion of, on second thought. This is like what the mainstream media does with Bushy-type Republicans. The mainstream media says they have a newfound respect for George W. Bush. Of course, it's always after they leave office that they do that. This is the same thing, okay? So I'm sure there were some interesting tidbits. I didn't watch the entire conversation. I'm sure there were some interesting tidbits from that conversation. And I'm not saying that Daryl Cooper said, well, actually Hitler, or things like that. But that was from the clips that I have seen, from what I have watched, that was the insinuation that, there's some sort of sympathy for the devil here. No, I'm just not going to play that game. Do I think? No. And I didn't even think, before this blew up, there were some weird things that I've heard in the past about Winston Churchill, particularly when it comes to drinking. He's not just like anybody in history, except for one person. Nobody is a spotless, unblemished lamb. The same can be said for Winston Churchill. So I didn't have like the highest opinion. I just thought, kind of going back to George W. Bush, I think in hindsight, he was a terrible president. Does that take away the fact that he united a nation, at least for a little while, which is a really, really hard thing to do in the aftermath of 9/11? I remember that. I was old enough to remember that. No, he did a good job on that. The economy was pretty good under George W. Bush. But overall, especially with the decision to go into Iraq, that was a failure. So it's easy to nitpick from, 60, 100 years later, 80 years later, whatever it's been. But if you fall into two ditches if you try to rewrite history. You paint people as spotless, or you paint people as being the big bad, when the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. And when it comes to Winston Churchill, I mean, he did rally his nation to take on a threat. Okay, and I think maybe one of the biggest indicators that this debate is relatively fake, I would wager that most of the people defending Daryl Cooper and his appearance on Tucker Carlson, they would vote for the modern reincarnation of Winston Churchill in a heartbeat. They'd vote for him in a modern-day heartbeat. So I think the whole debate is kind of fake and weird. Let's see. Big DC G-Man is back. If you're going to blame anyone for World War II, start with looking at the onerous reparation demands made of Germany after World War I. Okay. Okay. What's that, Ben? Sounds on. Yeah, sounds on. You're playing with your Buzz Lightyear? Yeah, can you show the audience the Buzz Lightyear? Can you hold him up to the microphone? What does he say? Dad. Yeah? Dad. Push that button.
You're not getting away, sir.
Yeah, Ben has a Buzz Lightyear action figure that he got for his birthday. And I love it because it just sounds like, we were joking around at Ben's birthday party, it sounds like Tim Allen just went into the recording booth and just recorded a bunch of crazy lines over and over again. Yeah, just like that. He's so funny. Yeah. All right, moving on. Jessica says, are you wondering why the oligarchy did not contact you with large bags of cash to say what you were going to say anyway? Would genuinely love to hear from anyone trustworthy what the hell is going on with this DOJ Russian dollars indictment. Yeah, so there are allegations from a Department of Justice indictment that the Russians paid YouTuber Lauren Chen sums of money to start up a media company. This media company licensed content from other even bigger named right-wing influencers. Tim Pool, Benny Johnson are the biggest ones. The indictment specifically says that Lauren Chen and her husband allegedly obfuscated where the money to license content from, like Benny Johnson and Tim Pool, they obfuscated where that money was coming from. So Benny Johnson, Tim Pool et al. Dave Rubin was another one. They didn't know where it was coming from. It does make you think. Some of the takes that I've seen from Lauren Chen in recent memory, it does make you think what is going on here. It's just mentioning in passing the Julie Cully story and then this one. It's like, I don't know much about anything anymore. I can't trust anything. Tiny Johnny says, which Protestant denomination would the country most benefit from if they had a revival and or reformation? I'm going to duck and I'm going to say the CREC. The CREC. That's the Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches. I like what I've seen from them. Do I agree? Jot and tittle are a lot of people who claim the mantle of Reformed. Are they absolute jerks? Yeah, yeah, they are. But the proof is in the pudding. And in terms of a very strong churches, just from the outside looking in terms of what you want to brothers in arms, linked arm in arm. That's what I see from some of those churches. So CREC, just putting me on the spot. That's what I would say. Let's see. Let's end with this one. Lalavis says, in regarding to the Russian payments to influencers, when I worked undercover in the early 90s, I worked with this deputy who was very good at buying large quantities of marijuana. He was an older Hispanic man and was very convincing. Turned out he was stealing large bales of marijuana from the evidence bins and selling them to some of the contacts he made while working undercover. The fact that this guy was corrupt did not make the rest of us or our agencies corrupt. It just made him corrupt. Yeah, I don't have a great deal of admiration for Tim Pool or Benny Johnson. And I don't have a great deal of respect for the Department of Justice either. But taking the allegations in that indictment at face value, I am giving the Dave Rubins, Tim Pools, and Benny Johnson the benefit of the doubt in this situation, as much as I possibly can. That's all I'm going to say about it. All right. Good set of questions. Thank you for all of your submissions. Like I said, we'll be back tomorrow. My beautiful wife, Bella, will be in the chair for No Suck Saturday. We'll have 5 news stories that objectively don't suck. We're also going to do another edition of Ask Izzy. That's coming up tomorrow morning for everyone, subscriber or not, at around 6 a.m. Hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for listening. We'll be back at it again on Monday.